I'm Heather Palmer, and I am a neurocognitive specialist. Really, that just means I'm here to help answer some of your questions about brain fog. Brain fog is often called chemo brain, but I much prefer to call it cancer-related brain fog because we know for certain that chemotherapy is not the only cause of this. And what is it? Well, it's a constellation of cognitive changes that come about as a result of some aspect of the cancer experience. It is absolutely real. There is no question in my mind that many, if not all, cancer survivors will experience some aspect of brain fog at some point during their cancer journey, whether that's from prior to diagnosis, through diagnosis, treatment, right into survivorship. There are so many different symptoms and they really manifest themselves differently in different people. Generally speaking, the most common symptoms are in the arena of memory, so having trouble remembering names and words or even whole concepts or events that have happened. Many will experience difficulties in some of the more frontal lobe areas like decision making and reasoning and organizing and planning. Others might find themselves suddenly having difficulty with their wayfinding, finding their way around. And probably one of the most common changes I would say people will comment on is changes in multitasking, really having difficulty sort of keeping multiple different balls in the air at the same time. Cancer-related brain fog is actually really quite common. In fact, some research would suggest that as many as 80% of all cancer survivors will experience it, but I still think that that number is pretty low. In my experience, 100% of all cancer survivors experience some form of cognitive disruption at some point during their cancer journey. There's no research that suggests it's permanent. In fact, the opposite. It would suggest that as time goes on, people will improve in the cognitive changes that they're experiencing. Especially what we can do is we can actually fast track those improvements by helping people to understand their skill set by perhaps using some external devices like lists, notes, planners, organizing differently, and even just thinking a little bit differently. And when people use those tools and devices, generally speaking, their thinking comes right back on track. We don't know a whole lot of why it's caused or who's going to get it. It's definitely not specific to a type of cancer or a type of treatment, and it's not specific to a certain individual either. The reality is cancer-related brain fog exists, and if you're having those challenges, then try to identify what those challenges are because there are absolutely lots of solutions to them. At this point in time, there aren't really any medications that have been designed to help with cancer-related brain fog or any type of brain fog for that matter. Although there are some healthcare professionals who might play around with or try various medications that are used for other purposes, whether it's anti-anxiety medication, medications to help with sleep, or even medications to help boost attention or manage an attention deficit disorder. But generally speaking, there are no medications that I would recommend. In terms of foods, now that is a different story. I'm not a nutritionist or an expert around food other than loving food myself and eating as much of it and more than I possibly should. However, that is not my advice. My advice would be to have balanced, healthy eating habits and maybe explore if there are opportunities to make improvements in terms of some of your eating habits. Training programs or activities to help improve brain function. There is absolutely a plethora of them available on the internet. However, I'm a much bigger fan of a much more personal approach where you might take a week, write down and log all of the mistakes or the challenges that you've been facing throughout the course of that week, and then review them, analyze them, Track and trend. See if there's patterns that are emerging. Is there a type of mistake that you make on a regular basis? And most importantly, what solution do you have in your repertoire? Or speak to peers and friends and find out, I keep doing this. Do you have any suggestions as to how I might improve upon that? A big part around organizing the brain is putting systems in place, figuring out what can I do now to prevent myself from making a mistake in the future? What kinds of external strategies can I use? Whether that's getting timers set to go off, whether that's using a more extravagant calendar system that is color-coded or broken into categories, or even post-it notes, lists, those sorts of things. Probably increasing the use of those tools is really going to help to supplement whatever cognitive changes you might be experiencing. Brain fog is a tricky one because it really doesn't fall under any individual discipline or the domain of any one professional body. So it's hard to determine who is best to speak to. First and foremost, I think speaking to family and peers, people who are going to be a little bit more aware of the kinds of changes you've been experiencing and possibly have some solutions to help you with it. Other cancer survivors who, through support groups, have experienced and maybe come through the other end in some of these challenges. From the professional arena within your local area, you might want to speak to an occupational therapist. They often will do some work in this particular area. Maybe reach out to some brain injury groups, because quite often those who work in that area have developed tools and strategies to help people with brain-related changes. Oh boy, explaining brain fog to people is always one of the hardest things, because usually when you try to say, oh, my memory's not as good as it used to be, others will say, oh, I know, I've got the same thing, I forget things all the time, but it's different. It's absolutely different for people who've had cancer and are experiencing these changes. So I think it's best to explain to them, you know what, my brain's just not functioning the way that it used to. I don't know why. It's particularly frustrating for me, but there's a lot that you can do to actually help me. So I'm going to put a lot more responsibility on you. If there's something important to you that I remember, then you're going to have to support me and write it down, call me to remind me, expect and understand that I might actually forget. Don't give up. Be persistent. Try not to fly by the seat of your pants and put systems in place. Acknowledge and be aware of the challenges that you're facing and address them head on. Say, why does this keep happening? What can I do to actually prevent this from happening again? And what system do I need to put in place to help manage that? And the more and more that you do that, the more and more your brain will actually develop new pathways, and it'll start to become more of an internal process, becoming less dependent on external tools. You will get there. There's very little evidence to suggest that people don't get their cognitive function back to the state that it was before. And if you actually work on it, that can come quite quickly, and you might actually see significant improvements over how you used to think, because you now have good systems in place that will sustain you as you get older.